Okay. Okay, we're going to begin. First of all, I'd like to welcome everybody this evening for our Akathist Heritage Salutation service earlier this evening, and also thank our Lenten meal host, Mrs. Irene Budis. Thank you. Give her a little welcome. And of course, the reason we're all here right now is for our 16th annual Lenten lecture series. We've been doing this now for 16 years here at St. George. And our theme for Fridays this year, Friday Lenten lectures, is the Torah, also known as the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. And the brief introduction that you found in our flyer says the Torah is also known as the law in the history of Judaism. It is the first 5 books of the Old Testament, also called the Pentateuch. And the question we can ask is, do these books have any importance for us today? What is contained in them? What role did they serve 3,000 years ago up until the present day? And we look forward to our, actually it's a 4-part series, as we delve into the mystery of these texts and try to master their meaning. And we are pleased to welcome our guest speaker this evening, Mr. Michael Lotti, who is a member of Holy Trinity Orthodox Church in East St. Paul. And I'll just read briefly Michael's little vitae bio. He's a professional writer and educator living here in the Twin Cities, where he and his family attend, as I said, Holy Trinity Church. He earned his Master's of Philosophy and PhD in Philosophy from the University of Wales in Swansea, where he focused on the writings of Kierkegaard, Wittgenstein, and Plato. He runs his own writing business and teaches occasionally at the University of St. Thomas. His book, you may have seen, St. George and the Dragon, is a middle grade novel and was published in the year 2014. So just one quick question for Michael before he comes up. Swansea, that's not Swansea, Illinois, is it?
No, Swansea West. For which Swansea, Illinois was named.
Right. That's what I thought. So, well, help me join in welcoming Michael Lotti. Okay.
I'll start out with an apology. Actually, 2. The first one I wasn't anticipating, but Father Rick failed to tell me that I was following Father Hans. So I'm sorry if I don't do justice to the text the way he did justice to the Oxford. Yes. Yeah, I'm really tempted to talk for an hour on that. I didn't know. I didn't know ahead of time. But the apology kind of is that I can't do justice to this magnificent text in just the time we have here. There are so many fascinating, enlightening, even disturbing things about this text that are worth meditating on. And I won't be able to get to them all. And I've been reading this text for years, and there are some parts about it that continue to surprise me, some still puzzle me, but it is a magnificent text, and I apologize ahead of time if I don't cover some part that you really wanted me to talk about. What I'm going to do is, the approach I'm taking tonight is what we call the narrative approach to the text. And I want to just lay out right away, this is not an anti-scholarly way of looking at the text at all. There are lots of different ways to look at an ancient text like this. Some, we could spend lots of hours, people do spend lots of hours looking at the Hebrew, and that can be very enlightening. We can spend lots of time comparing Genesis to other ancient texts, other texts from the ancient Near East. And I have done that, and it is very enlightening, it's very powerful. And I don't want to say that those things aren't good things to do. But the primary sense of the text, the first sense of the text, is the narrative of the text. It is a story. And that's what I want to focus on here. Now, what got handed out to you is what I think is the basic narrative outline of the book. And I call it the 3 C's. You have creation, you have catastrophe, and then you have covenant. And the covenant is broken up into kind of 4 different parts. Abraham and Sarah, then Isaac and Rebekah, then Jacob, Leah, and Rachel, and then Jacob's sons. And the text ends with Jacob and his sons all coming to Egypt to escape a famine and to be provided for by the providence of God through Joseph. All right, so this is a story. And I think one of the most important things to recognize is that it is not a happy story. It starts out happy. There's this beautiful elegance to the way that creation is described. God spoke, and it was so. God spoke, and it was so. There's no wrestling with primeval matter or dragons, no wars among the gods that were very common in ancient Near Eastern texts. It's just God spoke, and it was so. And the result is this great cosmic diversity, all of it reflecting the glory of the Creator. And it's not just, the text is very interesting because it's not just the instinctively glorious things like the stars or the mountains that reflect God's glory, but even ground plants and creeping things and fish. This marvelous creation is out there reflecting God's glory. And then something unusual and unusually beautiful happens. God does not just speak and make human beings. He speaks and then he fashions them with his own hands. It's like for human beings, he gets his hands dirty. And then he puts his own life into them. He gives them breath, his breath. Then he speaks to them and tells them and the rest of the living creation to be fruitful and multiply. Then he gives them this unique command: rule over the earth. Rule over this marvelous creation as my image, within my authority. Rule over this. And don't eat the fruit from this tree over here. So right at the beginning of the story, there's this wonderful, amazing, expectant tension centered on these strange human beings that can hear and reflect upon God's word in a way that nothing else in creation can. We know, right? We know that if Adam and Eve trust God, if they hear the word of God and keep it, to use a New Testament phrase, if they have faith, because that's what faith is to trust, to hear the word of God and keep it. If they do that, there will be this wonderful unfolding of creation to them, and a wonderful unfolding of their own lives as they live out God's commands to rule the earth. Moreover, they will be fruitful and multiply. So we're going to get this community of people. It's not just going to be Adam and Eve. There's going to be a community of these images of God. And they will live together under God's authority, guidance, and instruction. And then, well, who knows? The point of the story, even if we only read through chapter 2, is not to invite speculation on what would have happened. We know that it would have been beautiful. it would have been profound. It would have been good, even very good, as God says after he creates human beings. If you've never noticed that, go back and read chapter 1. Creates things, he says it is good. Creates things, he says it is good. And after he creates human beings, he says it is very good. But it is not to be. The catastrophe starts with divided minds, divided hearts. Then that grows into blatant disobedience, into shame, and futile attempts to cover up the shame. And then brother killing brother. A community of humans does, in fact, form, but it's fractured from the beginning. Seemingly because it knows nothing, or next to nothing, about God and his word. It does not take long before humans wrap themselves in violence, multiple lusts, some of them individual, some of them corporate. A flood is sent to cleanse the world and start over. But the survivors, chosen by God himself, don't do any better than Adam and Eve. In fact, their descendants are so darkened that they turn their nature inside out and start thinking that they are the ones who are divine. They even believe that they can, by their individual and communal amazingness, rule the heavens themselves. It's this great cosmic irony. Now that image, which completes this section of what I call the catastrophe, is the image of the Tower of Babel. And it wraps up kind of everything that's wrong with the human condition. The human society is indeed wrought with violence and selfishness. And even when human beings manage to cooperate long enough to not be violent and selfish with one another, right, to form this thing we call civilization, to hold some of the forces of evil at bay, what happens then? They style themselves divine. They put themselves on God's throne. And lingering in the air after the Tower of Babel is this promise that God makes to Noah, which is that he will never flood the earth again. So this is it. This is what we're stuck with. And I want to pause for a minute so that this picture of the human condition sinks in, the catastrophic picture. Now, most people, most atheists, to reflect what Father Hunt's talking about, don't have much trouble accepting the first part of the catastrophe. Right? Human beings are selfish, violent, and basically lost. Right? You have to be blind not to see that. But the second part is harder to see, but this is very, very important, a key part of the Genesis text and a key part of the foundation on which the rest of the scriptures are built. The second part, that human civilization is not a godly thing, is harder to swallow. We instinctively realize that communal civilized life is better than barbaric violence. And we're aware at some level that barbarism isn't really that far away. In the drunk driver, right, who could hit us on the road, in the burglar, in political and military forces that could destabilize a nation. We could go through the various examples of where that is happening even today. And that, in some ways, is precisely the point. Our best efforts to eradicate the darkness cannot put others, or even ourselves, under God's authority, guidance, and instruction. At best, civilization can only keep a patchy lid on the boiling cauldron of human passions. It's a social band-aid. And I will agree. I think the text agrees. A band-aid is better than no band-aid, but it's still just a band-aid. And it's on a body that's always bleeding somewhere. And still, human beings are so prone to congratulate themselves on what they have accomplished as a society. to equate political activism with godliness, to glory in the limitless possibilities of the human race. But the first 11 chapters of Genesis very clearly want us to know that this is not the salvation of the human race. Putting your efforts towards building human civilization, towards curing cancer, towards all these things that we might think are good, is just a little step away from being idolatrous and not realizing who is the real king over all the earth. Okay, back to the narrative. The first 11 chapters of Genesis are the setup, like the opening scenes of a play. But interestingly enough, the question of the setup here is not, what are these people going to do about this, right? Here's what human beings were supposed to be. Here's what they are. A normal narrative would go on and say, so what are human beings going to do? But we already know what human beings are going to do. They're going to keep being the way they are. The question of this narrative is, what is God going to do? He said that he won't destroy the world again, so how is he going to accomplish his purpose, which was laid out in the first 2 chapters? And the answer, in short, is that he's going to form a people through a covenant. But it's very clear from the very beginning of this covenant story that God's ways are not man's ways. When God first calls Abram, he calls him out of the city, calls it out of civilization, into the first biblical version of the wilderness. It's like going to Abram in New York or Los Angeles or Paris and saying, come, live in Albert Lee, and we'll save the world together. Second, right, so he calls Abram out of civilization. And then he doesn't call Abram to come out and build an army so he can go create a new civilization. He doesn't call Abram to promulgate a new teaching or even be a teacher of any kind whatsoever. He just commands Abram to leave the city. So right from the beginning, the covenantal relationship established by God is based on trust, faith, on hearing the word of God and keeping it, which should sound familiar. That's the same covenant that Adam and Eve didn't keep. And looking way ahead, to reflect what Father Hans was talking about, that's the one that the Theotokos keeps. To hear the word of God, keep it. Trust in God, even if you're being called out into the wilderness, the dangerous wilderness. And let's not forget, and here's a non-Genesis aside, when the Theotokos was called, you're going to bear the Son of God, unmarried single woman, it was essentially saying, do you accept being put at risk of getting dragged out of your home and stoned by all the men in the village? Because that's what was at stake. And she said, let it be done according to you. Okay, so this covenant is not a power play, as it were, the way humans think of power plays. And it's not this amazing teaching that's being infused into Abram that he's going to go teach everybody and form a new civilization that way. No, it's founded on faith and trust in God. And it's very important, I think, to recognize 2 other unhuman features about this covenantal situation. First, keeping the covenant is not a panacea for individual happiness. I'm going to say that again, because that's very kind of counter-American culture. The call to keep the covenant is not a call that says, here's how you're going to be personally fulfilled, happy, whatever. The only blessing given to Abram is one he doesn't even ask for. a son and countless descendants. Second, being chosen for the covenant, and I cannot stress how important this is, being chosen for the covenant is not a reflection of anybody's virtue. It's not a reward. In fact, the text goes out of its way, and it will continue to do so throughout the Old Testament and throughout the New Testament. If you ever take a very close look and read the Gospels, it's just amazing how ridiculous the apostles look, right? The founders of the church. The Bible's going to do this. But Genesis starts this tradition of showing us just how unvirtuous all the fathers of the faith were. For example, Abram, not once, but twice, lies about his wife, Sarah, to less than savory men in order to save his own skin, telling them that, well, yeah, she's actually my sister, so you can have her. Isaac lies about Rebekah for the same reason, to the same type of men. And it's only God who steps into the situation to prevent Rebekah and Sarah from being taken advantage of. Jacob, his sins are almost too many to count in the text. I'll highlight just a few. He preys upon his twin brother's weakness to steal his birthright. He connives with his mother to inherit Isaac's last blessing over and against his brother. He was afraid, reasonably so, much later in life, that his brother would want revenge upon him. So then he tries to bribe his way into his brother's favor. And then, seemingly baffled by his brother's good-naturedness, misses a key opportunity to build an alternate covenant-based community that God is trying to introduce into the world. He also does a really, really bad job of passing on the covenant to his sons. Jacob's sons are a veritable cornucopia of jealousy, self-interest, lust, and general ignorance of the covenant. Their treatment of Joseph, if you remember that story, where they resent him from the very beginning because he has a gift from God that they don't have. And then when the time comes, it's like, all right, we can finally kill him. And then, as fate would have it, they go, well, why kill him when we can make some money instead? That more or less sums up their attitude toward the covenant and life in general. Joseph is the only one of Jacob's sons who seems to have any sense of the covenant whatsoever. And I don't know if you remember the scene, but the scene is, they think he's dead, long dead, or a slave somewhere, or whatever. And it turns out he's Pharaoh's right-hand man, and they have to come begging for food. They don't recognize him, whatever. When Joseph reveals himself, he says this extraordinary thing to them. He says, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. What you meant for evil, God meant for good. What a beautiful thing to say. But even Joseph, the text goes out of his way to show that Joseph is far from perfect. When the Egyptians are suffering under a crippling famine, Joseph maneuvers and more or less forces all of the farmers to give up their land to Pharaoh in return for basically survival. So he essentially turns a landholding population into a population of bondservants, slaves. And it's very possible, I think, it's possible to read the text this way. I'm not going to stand by this. But it's possible that he planted the seed of mistrust, a deep cultural mistrust that slowly led the Egyptians to essentially turn the tables and enslave the Hebrews. Now, it's very interesting. So I said, one of the two of the important features of the covenant, again, are it's not a bargain with you in which you're going to get something that you want. And it's amazing if you ever stop and listen to a lot of explication in modern Christian circles. It's essentially of, hey, this is how you get to be really happy. This is how you get to be really, this is how kind of your dreams get to be fulfilled, which is as unbiblical as you can possibly imagine. And the other thing is, the covenant is not a reward for virtue. Now, there's the text also, throughout the narrative, does Genesis plants a seed that's going to be carried on, again, throughout the Old and the New Testament. It's very interesting. And that is, sometimes those who are outside the covenant kind of keep the covenant better than those inside the covenant. For example, I already mentioned Esau, right? Jacob's brother. Jacob is the keeper of the covenant. He's the keeper of the blessing, as it were. Esau has every reason to be resentful of his brother, to carry out revenge against his brother. But when the time comes and they meet, and Jacob is terrified that this is going to kind of break out into an all-out war and he and his family are going to get slaughtered, Esau essentially says, what's the problem? It's great to see you. It's this beautiful kind of hospitality and forgiveness coming from Esau. There's another story, the Hivite tribe. One of their members, one of the men from the Hivite tribe, abducts Dinah, one of the daughters of Jacob, and rapes her and keeps her, and commits a horrible crime. Now he and all of the men from the tribe go to Jacob, and they say, essentially, we realize something wrong has been done. He wants to marry her, and we want to, essentially, we want to make amends here. And Jacob says, well, if you want to do that, and if we're going to become one, you need to be circumcised. And they agree to be circumcised. They agree to be circumcised in order to make amends. Right? Then, of course, what happens is that Jacob's sons, knowing full well that circumcision of males puts them more or less out of service for about 3 days, take advantage of this. And as soon as they are circumcised and have essentially become part of the covenant, Jacob's sons take advantage of this and go and kill them. But the Hivites showed what it meant to actually say, I screwed up, Lord. I screwed up. I want to make amends. Pharaoh is another example. He is described as an Egyptian. The text is very careful. He's described as an Egyptian, obviously. But the Egyptians, it says, the Egyptians find shepherds an abomination, unclean. Yet at the end of Genesis, when Jacob arrives with what? All of his flocks. They're shepherds. Right? That's what they do. He arrives with all of his flocks. Pharaoh leaves the city. Right? There's that image again. Goes out to greet Jacob. And this is Pharaoh who understands himself as divine, right? One of the sons of the gods. And he asks for Jacob's blessing. So sometimes those outside the covenant keep the covenant better than those inside the covenant. Okay, back to the theme. The covenant, which is brought into existence by God. Now, its content will become clearer in the further books of the Pentateuch. But even in Genesis, the essence of it is very clear. And it's this. And the prophets are going to repeat this over and over and over again. I shall be your God, and you shall be my people. I shall be your God, and you shall be my people. That's the covenant. I'll tell you what to do, and you do it. And somehow, in the midst of the bonfire of sin and vanity that is human society, and despite the careless and unfaithful handling of the covenant by Abraham and his descendants, the covenant survives. And I think the text wants us to see that just the very survival of the covenant is like a miracle. It must be God working to keep this light alive in the darkness of the human condition. Human beings couldn't do it. And when you think about it, that simple formula, I shall be your God, and you shall be my people, is the arrangement with Adam and Eve. The way things were supposed to be from the very beginning. The natural order. To be in the covenant with God is simply to be who you really are. You are the creatures who say, you are the Lord, I am your creature. You are the only giver of life. Only under your authority, guidance, and instruction can I have the life I'm supposed to have. And again, the Genesis narrative is clear. The covenant with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph is God's way of restoring his original plan for the human race. And indeed, all of creation is precisely about bringing people into a correct relationship with him. He will be their God. They will be his people. It's so simple. So why is it so hard? Well, the Genesis story answers that question too. And the basic answer is why it's hard. This is biblical imagery here. I'm saying that so I don't get into trouble. But the imagery is that we're meant to be naked, and we don't like being naked. It's just imagery. Don't call Father Rick later this week and say, was he really telling us we should believe him? But that's the Genesis picture. We're meant to be naked, and we don't like being naked. Now, the imagery of nakedness in the first few chapters of Genesis is simple and profoundly true. The author goes out of his way to say that in their original glory, Adam and Eve were naked but unashamed. Naked but unashamed. They were exposed but didn't mind. They were completely dependent upon God. But they didn't assert, and they were okay with that. They didn't assert any right to exist. They accepted their life from God. They knew that they needed God's authority, guidance, and instruction to govern the earth wisely, to govern themselves wisely. And they didn't resent that. They didn't resent having a law that came from God and not from themselves. That this is true is evident from the way Adam and Eve act when they openly disobey God's command. What do? The imagery is very clear. They cover up. They hide, and this is one of the kind of darkly comic moments in the early Bible. And again, this sets up a theme of darkly comic moments throughout, right? So they cover up and hide as if you could hide from God, who is everywhere present and fills all things. It's ridiculous, and yet they do it. They cover up literally, and then they cover up by blaming others for their wrongdoing. Just a quick aside, a big part of the tradition of talking about Adam and Eve is talking about original sin, right? About the original act of disobedience. But what sometimes gets forgotten there is that right after the original sin was the original excuse, which is just as problematic. Why did you do this, Eve? And Eve says, well, the serpent made me do it. And then when God, and that's not good. Adam is worse. Why did you do this? God asked Adam. And Adam says, well, the woman that you gave me made me do it. So Adam doesn't just blame someone else, he blames God himself. And we'll forget the whole story about how Adam wasn't happy having giraffes and hedgehogs and fish as companions and he wanted something else. You gave it, it's your fault, right? They're covering up. They're ashamed and they want to cover up. Right? So it's comic, it's tragic, it's catastrophic, and it's comic. Cain seeks to cover up his shame. Right? The story, the setup to Cain and Abel is that for some somewhat inexplicable reason, God prefers Abel's gift to Cain's. Cain gets buried in resentment, in his shame. He can't accept God's decision, God's judgment. And how does he cover up his shame? He kills his brother, right? His brother exposes his shame, so he's got to cover it up. In his first recorded act as the new Adam, Noah. Right? Noah is like a new Adam, the whole thing. The creation is kind of like a retelling of the creation story. There's water, then God separates the dry land from the water, and then he tells Noah and his descendants to be fruitful and multiply, and so it's like a fresh start. Adam, and Noah is like a first Adam. And the first recorded act is what? He gets drunk and lies naked in his tent. And then the interesting thing, well, that's interesting enough, right? But the interesting thing is when his nakedness is exposed, when someone sees him, what does Noah do? He blames the viewer. Cursed be you and all your sons after you, he says. It's his problem. What does he do? He covers up. He covers up his shame. He doesn't want to be ashamed. He wants to get rid of it. Adam, Eve, Cain, Noah, us. We just simply cannot bear being exposed before God or a fellow human being. Even when we look ridiculous in the process, we'll do everything we can to cover up. And yet, the text is very clear. The only godly way to exist as a human being is in nakedness, with all the proper qualifications of that this is an image of biblical image. That's the substance of the covenant, of having a God, of being a creature. Father Hans was referring to this. If you listen to the words, the services of our church, even the whole premise of coming to church, you'll hear that they're always trying to peel off our layers, to expose us. So we stop laying the blame for our misdeeds on other people. We stop making excuses. We stop being in love with the world. We stop saying, I didn't do anything wrong. We stop saying, it's her fault, it's his fault. We stop saying, I'm so busy providing for my family, I don't have time. I'm so busy trying to build the human society that I don't have time for this. It's peeling all of that away. If any of you attended part of the canon of St. Andrew this week, you really know what I was talking about. It's a long litany of I've been selfish, I have not thought about your commands, I have just over and over just peeling us away, making us naked before God. If you've ever gone to confession, you know what this means. That's what confession is. We go and without any excuse, we present ourselves before God. Even our simple, repeated refrain, Lord have mercy, peels away some of the covering we want to put on ourselves. The church aims to get us to be openly ashamed before God. No hiding, no covering up. And that is like the precondition for knowing God's love and mercy and becoming naked and unashamed like Adam and Eve. When we are exposed to the world, so that when we're exposed to the world, to God, when we're vulnerable, so so that our only hope and trust is in God, then we can actually start living like human beings. Receive the authority, the guidance, the instruction from God. To be in that covenant established by Him. And that's the foundation. Right? That's the first story of the Bible. And it's the story that runs all the way throughout. And if you don't get it, if you don't get that bit about the covenant and what it means to be in that covenant, and nothing else, it'll all seem somewhat ridiculous to you. But if you can practice that, then all of a sudden the church services make sense, the rest of the scriptures make sense. And again, we start living like real human beings. So if you're going to be coming to the rest of these lectures, I ask that you keep that in mind, that what this is the continuing story of the covenant. Okay, the covenant that you're in. And that's all I have.
Thank you. We have time for questions and answers. Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, when you mentioned about science and doctors and cancer treatment and civilization and contrasting that to God's will, could you just a little bit elaborate on that?
Yeah, it's dangerous, isn't it? It's dangerous because no one wants to say that those are bad things to do, right? And I do a lot of work at the University of Minnesota, and I do a lot of work with scientists. Okay? And these people, I mean, sometimes at the University of Minnesota, I feel like I'm in Tower Battle Central because they are just so confident that with their research and with their work, they can make the world, and they can save the world, right? And on one hand, there's something very, very true about that. All of the things that we enjoy about modern medicine came about as the result of a lot of hard work, a lot of study, and a lot of dedication of all kinds of people, right? And all the blessings we enjoy come about that. So civilization is a good thing, but the danger, here's what I think Genesis brings out. The danger is in looking at civilization and all the blessings it brings, and especially when we look at it and say, well, that's so much better than barbarism and living in an unfree society or living in a state of war or something, that we think that this is it. This is the thing that's really important. And then we are worshiping ourselves and our fellow human beings and our collective power. And we don't get at the real problem, which is our divided minds, our divided hearts, our refusal to be ashamed before God, and that's the only thing that can bring lasting and real human community and real human fellowship. Okay? And so you've got to be careful about how you talk about it. But it's very important to remember all the glories of our civilization and all the things that we are rightly grateful for are not it. You cannot make that true. And it's very interesting, and here I'm going to jump all the way to the end of the scriptures, that the image of, at the end of the scriptures, is one of a city where people are living together. Right? We are meant to live in a city, right? But it's very interesting. The image is that the city, at the end of the book of Revelation, is the city that comes down from heaven. It's not the city that people build up for themselves. And that foundation is the covenant. The city that comes from hearing the word of God and keeping it. That's the city that we need to build, where God is the ruler of the city and not us. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think going to Mars is another way of putting ourselves together by our own means in a kind of psychological.
I think there's, I think there's that spirit can certainly be there. I mean, if you listen to the people who are dreaming, it's all about, they'll talk about, this is the progress of the human race, and this is how we're going to become better, or who we're really supposed to be. And they talk the same way about going to the moon, but they also talk the same way about, trying to find better treatments for breast cancer and pancreatic cancer, and so on and so forth. So I'm not sure I'd be willing to condemn it, but it does seem to be beside the point from a biblical perspective. Yes?
So I think it's important to like be a loving person along with consciousness and awareness of what you're doing. How do you do that, like with God?
In terms of how do you love God? Is that the question?
How do you live consciously with God and loving with God?
I think Father Hans talked about that a lot. You come to church. And coming to church is like this, it's like, again, to use the biblical image, it's like becoming naked. It's your saying, it's a place where you don't come in to assert yourself. It's a place where you come and hear the word of God that comes to you. Where God comes to you in the Eucharist, in the Word, even in the fellowship and love that you receive from the other people. But it's standing in that place of humility and accepting what God has to give you, accepting His guidance, His instruction, His authority. And when you do that, you also find out that that's love and power to love others. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I got off easy because Father Hans said it all before I did, so I just plagiarized him openly. But I think he'll let it pass.
Look at Ephesians 4 times in a row.
That's another way.
Not all true. But what you said was
Any other questions? You don't have a question, John? Dan Simon, I've never known you to be silent this long.
You said something really interesting. You compared the Genesis account to other creation stories. You said it was really in one household.
Well, I briefly alluded to a couple of Babylonian and Assyrian creation stories. One of them is that creation results after the gods have a war. There's a war among the gods, and I don't remember all the details. But there's this war among the gods who really are basically just human beings, right? Cosmic human beings. But they're human beings. They're jealous. They're violent. They're selfish. What they really want is power. And they have this war, and then one of the primary gods is killed, and his blood starts spilling out, and the blood is what forms, it's kind of what forms the substance of what becomes the earth, right? And human beings and stuff like that. So in that picture of things, we're just kind of some accidental byproduct of some dead god from a violent war. There's nothing particularly special about us, and there's certainly nothing particularly special about the gods. But compare that to God said, let there be trees, and there were trees. Let there be light, and there was light. Let there be creeping things, and there were creeping things. Let there be lights in the heavens, and fish in the sea, and there were lights in the heavens. There's this kind of calm, beautiful authority and purposefulness of everything.
And also,
So that's just one story.
yeah, but also, I would repeat also, that in the paganness, the world is created from the stuff and the substance of the gods. It comes out of the body of the gods. So there's really no difference between, I mean, think of Hinduism. Hinduism is a pagan religion. There's no difference between the creator and the created. That's why they can worship a rat or worship a cow. Because it might be God. It really might be God. But when God speaks the world into existence, he's still holy on it. He's still holy. It doesn't come out of the body.
His glory infuses the world, and he is above the world.
Yeah. It's really beautiful.
It's a very different story.
And there's a different God.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm worried that you never say the word relationship, and in other discussions or circles, we talk about covenant. It's always relationship. Are there different implications or why?
No, that's a good question. Did you guys hear the question?
Repeat it, please.
So the question was, I didn't use the word relationship. Actually, I think it is in here, but I'm not going to.
You use the word covenant, that was more than
Yes.
relationship.
So, what kind of relationship are we talking about? We're talking about a covenant, because a covenant implies a relationship, right? And is your question, and I really don't want to put words or ideas in your mouth, is your question, is talking about the covenant the same thing as talking about, my personal relationship with God, which is kind of a common way in some Christian circles to talk about it. I want to say yes and no. And I'm going to go way ahead here. Genesis is very clear that insofar as there is a relationship, it's not like a friendship. It's not like Adam and Eve. The relationship is, as it were, a one-way relationship. And there is really only one way it can go, which is that God is God, and you are not. And that you are completely dependent upon God, not just for your moment-to-moment and day-to-day existence, but you're dependent upon Him for life. Okay? And again, that's not just breathing, but the life that comes from living out His instruction. And there's a sense in which this is not akin to any other relationship you can imagine. Because every other relationship you have, even if it's with a dog or a human being or even a place, both the idea of being a relationship is that these things are changing together. But there is no change here. God is God, and you are not. That will always be the case. But there is something correct in thinking about a personal relationship with God, and this is borne out, again, throughout, this gets developed later by the prophets, where the relationship with God is described in terms of a marital relationship. You have the bridegroom and the bride, and God keeps calling Israel his bride. He wants to marry her, right? He wants to be unified with her in love. And this is all throughout the Gospels too. Jesus calling himself the bridegroom. He's calling it imagery. So there is a intimacy there that's hinted at. But Genesis, I think the covenant, and I think this is true throughout the Bible, makes clear that the condition of that intimacy is getting the relationship straight in the first place. And that is unlike any other relationship you can have. Does that answer your question? So, and maybe I unconsciously avoided the word relationship because it carries in our in modern society, it carries a lot of people will talk about, well, relationships are what it's all about. and it carries a kind of touchy-feely, feel-good and kind of emotion, and so on and so forth. And that is just not the biblical way of talking about God. It's just not. And the intimacy that you have with God, insofar as you can, is the condition of it is very, very different.
Any one last question? Well, I'll help give Mike So just a couple of things as we close. I'm glad this is the first time that Michael's been a speaker for our lecture series, and it's worked out really well, obviously, if you're hearing tonight, and also helped out really well for me because he helped edit all my flyer for the Lenten lectures, which needed a lot of edits, so thank you for that. And I forgot also, maybe he's being humble, but it's really Dr. Michael Lotti, right? And I'm sorry if I didn't have that on the flyer. So certainly want to recognize your educational accomplishments. And also just on a personal note for myself, hearing your offering this evening, I really appreciated kind of the way you just brought all that together in terms of the book of Genesis and the flow of the stories as they run together and tying the theme together really well, and highlighting, which I think is a very important thing that is often forgotten and often mistranslated, misinterpreted, is that almost all of the personalities and figures of the stories are flawed people, deeply flawed people. And for whatever reason, many of the interpretations of the Genesis stories idealize these figures. And I think that creates a lot of problems for us and our spirituality and our relationship, our covenantal relationship with God and with each other. So I appreciate you bringing that to light.
Can I say one quick thing that might, just something that might help? All the ancient Near Eastern texts of that time were all hero stories, right? And sometimes the heroes are people, sometimes they're gods, sometimes they're God-human, and so on and so forth. And it's very interesting that the Hebrew story, there's only one hero. There's one hero. And it's all good. There can only be one hero. And however you approach the text, the only hero is God.
Thank you. And also, again, we just want to thank Irene for the food this evening. Thank everybody for coming tonight. Remind you of our Lenten lectures continuing next Friday, which will actually be a little break from our Torah-Pentateuch theme to go into our Lenten retreat with Father Barnabas Paul. But we also have our Wednesday Lenten lectures and our services and our meals. And if you have not yet already, I encourage you to sign up for the meals. Looks like Fridays are covered, but Wednesdays there's a lot of openings for hosting a Lenten meal on Wednesday evenings. So please take a look at this before you leave, or perhaps when you're here on Sunday. Why don't we close with a prayer? In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Christ our God, we thank you for this opportunity to gather in fellowship and learning. Thank you for bringing Michael into our midst and speaking through him, as well as Father Hans. And we ask that you be with us, strengthen us as we make our journey through Great and Holy Lent to reach Pascha, the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ. So we give glory to him, together with his eternal Father, his all holy, good and life-giving Spirit, now and forever, in the ages of ages. Amen.